an insider's view. Examples of primary sources include what? Field notes, research reports, articles written by the researchers who conducted the study, who invented the theory, lab reports, artifacts, diaries, autobiographies, interviews, videos, uh, audio recordings, meetings, and proceeding recordings. It means that when here an author invented or gave a theory, an approach, a new finding to a given field of research. If you take from these resources, these resources are called primary sources. And we've got secondary sources. And these, as I said, are found in articles, books, not in dissertations and theses. Because dissertations and theses report what? Secondary sources and tertiary sources. So what is meant by secondary sources? Secondary sources are summaries, discussions, interpretations of primary original works that were previously presented elsewhere. Examples of secondary sources are journal articles. I'm going to say that journal articles are primary sources. They are primary sources when they here give an overview about an invented what theory or an approach. But if a study is conducted in the same field by other scholars, here these studies are secondary sources, not primary sources. Or reports that summarize, report on, or critique other scholars' works, biographies, commentaries, summaries, or evaluations of events that happened in the past are also considered secondary sources, mainly for the field of civilization. They can work with secondary sources. It means that evaluation summaries of events that happened in the past. In past events. And we've got tertiary sources. So tertiary sources, and you are going to find difficulties in making a distinction between what is called secondary sources and tertiary sources. So tertiary sources are those that summarize and critically evaluate. So if we here return to what I said, I said secondary sources are summaries, discussions, and interpretations of original works, whereas tertiary sources are what those that summarize and critically evaluate and review primary and secondary research sources. Means that tertiary is a third hand, like dissertations and theses, conference papers. Example of tertiary sources are encyclopedias, including Wikipedia, although Wikipedia is not taken as a source for any academic research paper. Textbooks, bibliographies, guidebooks, handbooks, manuals, etc. Sources are classified as tertiary by some people, or disciplines may be considered secondary by others. For example, in some disciplines, textbooks are considered as secondary sources, while in others they are referred to as tertiary. So here there is a disagreement among scholars or researchers, students, about what is considered as secondary sources and what is considered as tertiary sources. So this is an overview concerning the most important sources. Got first, second sources, and tertiary sources, and the main differences between these sources. So sources are not limited, as you can see here in the slide, to scholarly articles, books, dissertations and theses, conference papers, but also to databases and websites. So after here gathering or creating your library, you can say library or bookshelf, you are going what? To read. and read and read. And through your readings, you are going to take notes and you are going to put outlines to your study. So through note taking, which is an important step, I'm always telling you, it is an important step in writing any academic paper, starting with an essay. Writing an essay, you take notes. And of course, here I'm supporting what is called hand note taking, and not here you taking notes in word processing. That is to say, in your computer, but hand note taking. It means that using your agenda and you are going to write or take notes, outlining the most important points to create your, of course, literature review. If we take, for example, here our topic that we have selected for the practical side in the classroom, the quest for female identity in Marie-Sans Sola. So if we take here, get to look on the novel and the main themes here, so we find the central theme is selfhood or self and identity. Discrimination. So in this case, if we want to select data or primary or secondary sources or even tertiary sources to deal with this topic, the first thing that we are going to focus on is to provide a background about the society of that time for our literature review. Of course, providing a background about the society of that time. What else? Providing a background about here the position of black females in that society in that time. What else? When it comes to the literary theories, here through reading the novel, we found that the most important theories that can be used here to analyze or to approach the novel is social psychoanalysis, and not only psychoanalysis, literary criticism. We can use social psychoanalysis, literary theory. And of course, why? For what reason? Why? Because here we are going to talk about the position of women and how they create their identity in both home and society. So as an outline, if we suppose as an outline for our first chapter, it means that the literature review providing a socio-historical context of that society at that time. It means that in the time that literature was written, talking and through here getting a look on the novel, we found that racism is also a central theme in the novel. So we're going to talk about racism and its impact on Black Americans at that time. And of course, Black women and parental system in that society. And this, of course, will guide us. For what? Will guide us to to talk about the rise of Black feminist movement, and therefore feminist literary criticism. And we are obliged to talk about Black feminism and the quest for female identity. We are also obliged to talk, since here it is the quest for female identity. Quest for female identity, it means that self and identity. And as scholarship or scholars, we are going to include a Giro 1996 to talk about selfhood or self and identity, social psychoanalysis theory, and among the most important scholars, we've got Jang, we've got Erikson, and Herbert Mead, leading figures in social psychoanalysis theory. And finally, the leading father of what is known as the social identity theory, Tajfel, 1982. Of course, here we should mention, and this is included in what is called selfhood, an identity construction in literary text, and social identity theory. So it is important to include this theory because here the key term is female identity and the quest of females for their female identity in the society. So taking into account just black feminism movement is not enough to analyze or to approach the literary text Sula, but we have also to include the social identity theory, while to analyze here the development or the quest for black females for their identity. It means that their selfhood and their social identity in that society in which there are racism and parental system. So these are the major here titles or outline. So through our readings here, we can guess what it should be included and what should be excluded from our literature review. So through my readings, I found that we should include these. And here for our practice, you are going to write literature review of no more than 10 pages about this topic, and here it's up to you and to your readings to include these or to exclude them or to include other titles depending on your readings. So this is here an example on how to take notes and how to outline, and we have provided some outlines on what it can be included in our literature review. We return to the literature review of the journal. So we identified the missing parts in previous studies, and your study addresses highlighting concepts that support your hypothesis, methods, results, or conclusion. We suppose that we are going to write an article, not the dissertation about the quest for female identity in Sula. So the main concepts is, as we have seen, selfhood and social identity. So these concepts are important to define in our literature review for our article, which will be published in the journal. For a standalone literature review, highlight the concept in each article and show how they strengthen a hypothesis or show a pattern, identify and address issues in previous studies. We should also mention here the issues which are not addressed in previous studies and identifying what is accurate and what is out of scope within these works. It means that what is important and what is not important in these research works, so that to limit here your scope to the most important. How long should a literature review be? Of course, here the literature review of an article, not of dissertation. So determined by the number of sources, and it is the same. If we take this question, it is the same for a literature review of dissertation. It is determined by the number of the sources that you are going to include, and generally here the literature review of a thesis dissertation here is longer in comparison to the second chapter, while the third chapter, mainly for the field of literature and civilization, the third chapter is longer in comparison to the previous and second chapters. When it comes to article writing, it stands into no more than 2-3 pages due to the number, because here in journals, when it comes to publication, they count the number of words and the number of pages. So if here the article exceeds 15 pages, you are going to pay more, mainly in here in journals that work with publication fees. You are going to here to pay more in order to publish your article. Why? Because your article exceeds 15 pages. How many sources? And of course, here the student is going to say, how many pages I'm going to include in my literature review? And this question is, we face this question every year with our candidates. And how many sources should I use to write my literature review? So this is determined, I'm always here answering my students that this is determined by the scope of the topic. If the scope of the topic is limited, you are going to limit your sources. If it is broad, you are going to include more and more here sources for your to write your literature review.